Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this new session hosted by CFA Society Mexico. We are delighted to have today with you Professor Dale Whittington. Dale Whittington is a professor in the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is an expert on water, finance, and economics and management, and has consulted for several international organizations and corporations. So with no further ado, please, Dale, the floor is yours, and good morning. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Francisco. It's a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to your questions and discussing these issues with you. I want to talk for about 45 minutes, and then that'll give us time for questions, but I'm happy to take questions as we go along. My friend, the late John Briscoe, Stockholm Water Prize winner, used to say that water problems are local and solutions are contingent. About 2 weeks ago, the Global Commission on the Economics of Water released its report, and I encourage you to take a look at it. Basically, the commission is arguing the exact opposite of what John Briscoe used to say. The commission is arguing that water is a global common good, a global public good, and that it needs to be managed at the global scale. And the commission talks about the disruptions that are occurring to the hydrological cycle at the global level, the shifts in atmospheric rivers that are occurring, increased hydrological variation, climate changes causing higher temperatures. There's increased continental drying, loss of soil moisture, decreases in water storage globally. So there's a lot of things going on at the global level with implications at the local level. And the commission is arguing in its report that raw water withdrawals need to be reduced to stabilize this increasing disruptions in the hydrological cycle. Now, not all locations are going to be this water stressed. As you can see in this graph on the left, the areas in blue, there's actually perhaps more water. But the commission is saying that we need to reduce freshwater withdrawals, and that 70% of the global freshwater withdrawals are in agriculture. So agriculture is going to have to play the major role. But I'm going to talk about urban today, because urban is going to have to play a role in this transition that we're facing in the Anthropocene. I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to first part of my lecture is going to be a historical perspective on urban water and sanitation systems and how they develop over time. And then I want to look at some evidence on where utilities are today, because in the Anthropocene, utilities are going to be at all different levels on this development path, different stages on this development path, and are going to be hit in different ways. In the second part, I want to talk about a policy mix for the Anthropocene for urban areas. And I want to talk a little bit about the economics of a circular water system. And I'll look at some of the trade-offs between reducing raw water withdrawals and system-wide cost. And this is work in progress, so I'm quite interested in your reactions to it. But some of the results that we're getting about the magnitude of reductions in raw water withdrawals are, I think, quite striking. So the first part, I want to talk about municipal water and sanitation development path, and I characterize this as three phases. This is a continuum. I mean, there's no hard and fast sort of boundaries between these three phases. But in the first phase, what you usually see is investment dominated by the state. That's not always true, but typically the financing requirements are large, and the state plays a major role. Typically, the rich households get connected first, and many times the poor households are left unconnected to the pipe distribution system and with high coping cost. So you have high subsidies, typically very low prices in phase one. Often the utilities have little revenues and little money to fix leaks. There's little investment in wastewater collection and treatment in phase one. So this is mostly investment in the piped water system. But there are four forces of disequilibrium in phase one that push cities toward phase two. The first is political. Poor unconnected households are paying high coping costs, and they want private connections that they see rich households enjoying. So there's political pressure to expand the network, to invest in improved infrastructure. There's financial pressure. The state needs the financial resources from higher tariffs to expand and improve services. There's also technological issues in phase one that push you toward phase two. The lower tariffs lead to high water use. There's no financial resources for maintenance, so there's high leakage. This leads to rationing and unreliable service. And there's public health pressures. The poor water quality and lack of investment, particularly in wastewater collection and treatment, increased public health risk, and there's popular support for wastewater collection and treatment. So this pushes us toward phase two, and as GDP increases, we see connection rates rise, and we start to see the construction of wastewater collection and treatment systems. We see some price increases. So cost recovery does increase in phase two, but the politics are sort of dominated by a debate about affordability and whether the poor can afford these piped services. Again, in phase two, there are forces of disequilibrium. As incomes grow, households can afford better housing, and people want to bring services indoors, which increases political pressure for piped water and sewer connections in apartment buildings and houses. And gradually, as GDP increases, environmental issues increase in importance. So solving the wastewater collection problem becomes more important in large cities. But phase two also faces forces of stagnation, and it turns out for many places it's hard to leave phase two. The political opposition to tariffs increases comes from everyone. The poor often can't afford piped water and sewer services, and the rich are used to having low tariffs. So there's a debate that goes on often for decades in phase two between, sort of this cheap water for everyone and heavy subsidies versus sort of the economist view of getting prices right in the sector. The other thing that contributes to the forces of stagnation is that the public health risk decrease is a political issue. I'll show you these are some results from a paper that Richard Carson, Michael Hanneman, and some others published just recently in one of the Nature journals called Communications Medicine. And basically, we ask people in large surveys in 7 middle-income countries which health problems they thought were most important. So this was sort of a best-worst state of preference format. And what I would call your attention to is the column on the far right for water and sanitation. And in every country except South Africa, water and sanitation in these middle-income countries was perceived as the least important public health problem. So the public health pressure, the pressure for change to get out of phase two is diminished as people put less and less importance on the health benefits of improved water and sanitation. So what does phase 3 look like? Well, phase 3, you get most of the population in a city connected to pipe networks, and you get most people with 24/7 potable water. Exactly whether it's 100% or 95%, we can discuss. But basically, you get the basic infrastructure in place, but further improvements are needed, particularly with regard to customer assistance programs. You need to ensure that poor households can afford these piped water and sanitation services. And what we're seeing in the Anthropocene is what I'll call phase 3 plus, the need to not only give piped water and sewer services to everyone, but we have increased risks of running out of water in day zero. So we've got to deal with the raw water supply. We need the Global Commission on the Economics of Water is saying we have to reduce the urban water footprint, reduce urban freshwater withdrawals. We're more and more concerned about environmental sustainability, both on the raw water input side and on the wastewater side. And we've got to a new set of investments that we need to make to deal with hydrological and climate constraints. And we've seen this in Cape Town, but the risk of day zero are growing. I mean, and we're seeing this in many other places in the global south. So let me just summarize sort of where we are on this three-phase development path right now. I'm just going to show you some of the global data to give you a sense of where countries are along the path. This is urban piped water coverage versus GDP per capita, and here the three phases sort of show up pretty clearly. I mean, you can look at the red dots at the bottom. And you see, water coverage in Liberia, Nigeria, other places, down at 10, 20, 30% of the population of cities. Then the yellow dots, are phase 2, where urban water coverage is not universal, but it's the majority of the population has piped water connections. And then the green dots, you can see once you get over about GDP per capita of about 10,000, most countries are able to have cities with where coverage, at least the piped water network, is nearly 100%. So let's look at urban populations with sewer connections versus GDP. And again, you see the three groups. The red dots at the bottom are what I call phase 1, where urban populations, very few people, less than 15%, have sewer connections. And you see a wide range of the yellow dots here in phase 2, all the way up to really, something like 20, 30,000 US dollars per capita. Although over $10,000 per capita, you see some countries have achieved near universal coverage with sewer, some connection. There's a lot of heterogeneity in these data, but I think you can see the three groups I've described. This is urban population with wastewater treated. So this has sewer connections plus wastewater treatment. And again, you see the three groups. The red dots here down at the bottom, the yellow dots, phase 2 is spread way out. The green dots here really, the wastewater treatment, starts to pick up after GDP per capita of about 30,000. So this is, again, these three groups, and each of these groups is going to be hit by the forces of the Anthropocene that are described in the Global Commission report. I'll show you one more graph here to sort of see the cluster again. This is average revenue per cubic meter sold versus GDP per capita. And you can see an upward trend. As GDP goes up, you can see revenue per cubic meter goes up, but there, again, there's a lot of heterogeneity. Down at the bottom, the pluses are the low income countries are charging very low prices. The yellow triangles are phase two. Again, a lot of heterogeneity, but there's an upward trend in the revenue per cubic meter sold. And then the blue circles are sort of, characterized as phase three, where we're not at cost recovery levels in all these places, but we're getting closer. So I want to talk a little bit about why it's so hard to make progress in phase two. I mean, this is a debate that has been going on throughout my career, decades in the water business, between water as a human right and water as an economic good. And we kind of have a compromise on how to price water that's evolved in the in phase two, which or what I'll call increasing block tariffs. You might know them by different names. There's actually two different cultures going on in the it makes the use of these tariffs kind of confusing. On the one hand, you have a tariff structure like Singapore uses, and this is the top line in this graph. And Singapore uses an increasing block tariff structure to signal to rich households that they don't really want you to use more than 40 cubic meters per month. I mean, so they're signaling that, they're giving you information about marginal costs, and they're also giving you information about sort of social norms. So the cost recovery price is, they say, for the Public Utility Board is sort of set. Everybody pays, 90% of the people are paying close to the cost recovery price. And then the upper block is again used to tell people, to signal to people that you're using more than your fair share. Contrast that with what's going on in New Delhi, down at the bottom. And this is true for many cities in the global south. You have an increasing block tariff where most of the population falls in the lifeline block. It's an extreme example in Delhi. If you use less than 20 cubic meters a month in Delhi, you don't pay a water bill. So if you use more than 20 cubic meters a month, you do pay for a very low rate for the first block, and then you pay, again, somewhat higher rates all the way up to 50 cubic meters a month or more. All of these blocks are far below the cost of service, the total cost of service. So the more water you use, the more subsidies you get. So the two cultures, the use of increasing blocks, are really about where the focus is. Singapore's focus is on the upper block. And in much of the global south, the focus is on the lower block, what's called the lifeline rate. And it is not surprising that if the majority of the population in Delhi with pipe connections pay no water bill, that revenues are going to be very, very low and insufficient to cover most of the cost of service. So that's the first part of my talk. I want to move to the second part about the economics of a circular water economy. And just to reiterate, I'm going to look at sort of this problem that the Global Commission identifies about reducing raw water withdrawals, and just remind you what the benefits of that would be. The first is that there reduce negative externalities on local water resource systems. You're going to take less water out of the ground, less water from freshwater sources. You're going to use less water, and you're going to be recycling more water, so that negative externalities are reduced. You're also less dependent on the broader water resource system, and better equipped to manage extreme events and avoid day zeros, because you have much more of the water under your control in the utility. Now we're going to look at system-wide costs. Some of the cost will some components in the urban system are going to be reduced, and then finally there's a co-benefit that I described of contributing to the reduction in the disruptions in the global hydrological cycle. So I'm going to use a very simple stylized model here. And I'm going to contrast what I'll call a flow-through inefficient system or open loop, which is what many utilities use. There's a fresh water source. I withdraw water, I treat it, and I send it to my customers, some non-residential customers and residential customers, and I treat it and discharge it to the environment. And so I'm going to look at this with a high-income city. It's going to be a population of 1 million. I'm going to assume there are 250,000 households. Leakage from the utility and the distribution system to the customers is 30%. I'm going to assume that total residential demand is 200 liters per capita per day. Not sure what it is in Mexico City right now. That's a kind of a normal number for many places, but in many places in the United States, we use many times that because we're watering lawns and so forth. So I'm going to assume there's no potable reuse and no desalination. So this is a simple model, but it characterizes a lot of cities around the world. So I'm going to look at those nodes and links, and I'm going to put costs on them. Now these, I'm actually going to ask 2 questions with this simple model. The first one's actually quite easy, and it's what can I do in terms of reducing raw water withdrawals with a comprehensive policy mix. The second is much harder, and it's actually to look at the trade-offs between reducing raw water withdrawals and system-wide costs. I am going to assume some costs, and I'm going to put them on nodes and links, and then I'm going to have quantities moving between each node and link in order to satisfy customer demand, and I'm going to assume losses at both the nodes and the links. I'm going to look at 4 policy interventions. I'm going to look at them individually, and I'm going to look at them in combination. I'm going to show you, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to show you the combinations, but I'm going to assume that I can make investments in leakage reduction. I'm going to take those the leaks from the baseline case from 30% down to 10%. I think, we have a lot of evidence globally that that's a doable leakage reduction. I'm going to take demand down in 2 steps on customer water use. I'm going to go from 200 liters per capita to 165 and down to 130 liters per capita. And I'm going to take potable reuse from 0. I'm going to recycle 30% of my wastewater for potable water reuse. And then I'm going to recycle 60% of my of my wastewater for potable reuse. And I'm going to then add 1 desal facility, not so big. I mean, I'm not going to say that all of this water is coming from desal. I'll add a small desal unit for 50,000. So now I actually have a circular water system. But it's circular, and because I'm sending some of the wastewater to a potable water reuse facility, and then sending that back into the raw water intake. So I can use this water more than once. Is the in a steady state world, I get to I can reach steady state, and I'll be using some of this potable water use more than once. Let's look at 5 policy mixes. I'm just going to start and get increasingly stringent and show you what we can do here. I'll take the first policy mix, I'll take leakage reduction from 30 to 10 and demand reduction down the first step, 200 to 165. In the second policy mix, I'll take demand reduction down to 130. Third policy mix, I'm going to add potable reuse. And then in the fourth policy mix, this actually the policy mix down here should be 60 on the policy mix down here to 60. And then the policy mix 5, I'm going to add the desal facility. So this is it kind of goes from less stringent to more stringent, from low cost to high cost. And I just want to show you what we can do for both system-wide costs and for freshwater withdrawals. I want to say a bit about the cost. I'm an economist and I work with engineers, and to get the cost for these nodes and links is a non-trivial problem. You can find system-wide costs from utilities. I think it's worth just reflecting why these costs are so difficult. I mean, one, they're location specific. So I don't have costs for Mexico City. You could easily tell me, this doesn't make any sense for Mexico City. C5 should be, twice as big, and C7 should be half that. So, you'd have to, be careful about sort of the applicability of these to different places. But the other is that actually, there's some other reasons why we don't know, because utilities often don't know these costs. They don't know these costs for nodes and links because they have to invest money to get engineers to estimate the cost for different nodes and links. I talked to a friend of mine in Milan about this, and he said the leaks in Milan are just too expensive to fix. They don't know what it would cost to really fix all these different nodes and links. There's a lot of leaking water, they know for sure, but they don't know what it would cost. But they know it's expensive, and they know they can't really afford it. The other thing is that utilities actually don't want you to know these costs. So they don't, these costs are not reported anywhere by utilities. So take these costs with a grain of salt, but I've struggled to try to figure out what the cost for these nodes and links are. Okay, let me show you some results. These are raw water withdrawals by policy mix. Again, my hypothetical city is a high-income country with a 30% leakage at baseline. In policy mix 5, the most comprehensive one, reduces raw water withdrawals by 75%. That's a huge number, right? I mean, I'm adding some desal. I'm recycling some wastewater, and I'm reducing customer water demand. And I think I can get a city like this, in a much better position to deal with day zeros. But this doesn't require a lot of technical innovation. These interventions are readily available if you want to do them. And if this was in a city in the global south, leakage could be much more than 30%. I mean, it could be 50, 60%. So you could, if you're looking at your raw water situation and you're saying, we don't have the raw water we need, you can make dramatic changes. So given my system-wide costs, these different policy mixes don't increase system-wide costs very much. I mean, if you add the desal, you add some, but the point is that as you increase the cost at some nodes, you decrease the costs at others. And you don't need as much raw water. You don't need to treat as much wastewater. You don't need to treat as much raw water. So, like I said, this is work in progress. I don't want to, make too much of the differences across these policy mixes, but just look here at this previous figure, I can reduce raw water withdrawals by 75%. My initial estimates are that only cost me 12% more in terms of system-wide cost. So big reductions in raw water withdrawals, not big cost increases. These are raw water withdrawals versus system-wide costs. And you can see up in the northwest corner up here, this is baseline. And with my hypothetical city, I'm withdrawing about 400 liters per capita per day. I can go way down here and my system-wide cost increase. This is sort of what the trade-off curve might look like here. But again, there's not a lot in the literature on this, and I don't think that the sort of average citizen really is aware of what these trade-offs look like. I mean, what you could do in terms of making your urban water system much more resilient to day zeros, and much less of an environmental impact on the surrounding ecosystems. So Singapore does a lot of this already. I have worked with the Public Utilities Board in Singapore, and what does their policy mix look like? Well, they're made dramatic improvements in leakage reduction. They've raised tariffs. They have a sustained program of behavioral nudges to get water use down to that 130 liter per capita per day. Obviously, from an economic perspective, you don't want to drive water use down to 50 liters per capita per day. You want to try to balance, marginal costs and benefits. But I don't think that the welfare losses associated from going from 200 liters per capita per day down to 130 liters per capita a day are very big. So I don't think obviously, you don't want to drive it. From their perspective, in Singapore, you don't want to drive it too much lower, but it may be somewhat. But it's largely about stopping leakages in the home, stopping long showers, fixing leaking toilets, giving people behavioral nudges. But people in Singapore have a very modern lifestyle with basically 130, 140 liters per capita per day. So right now, Singapore is reusing wastewater flows for potable reuse. There are limits to how much, nobody's recycling 100% of wastewater flows, but they're thinking that my numbers of 60 are kind of their outer limit on that. They do have desal facilities in place. Importantly, they have customer assistance programs to help the poor. So they don't give everybody free water, but the poor people can all afford, the poor households in Singapore can all afford piped water and sewer services because they're subsidized. They're targeted subsidies to help people pay for their utility bills. And I think, we'll increasingly see more nature-based solutions for places like Singapore. They have multi-purpose uses for the urban watershed, providing recreation, green space, and recycling of water. So that's my story today. I want to say just one more thing about this, about the political economy of this policy mix. The system-wide costs don't go up that much, but there's a political economy problem, and the problem is that you're asking people to use much less water. In my example, I went from 200 liters per capita per day down to 130. But the system-wide costs go up. So what you have to tell people is you're going to use substantially less water, but you're going to pay more for it. Not too much more for it, but that's going to require, and it does require in Singapore's case, substantial public education programs to explain, why that is true, and particularly in the global South, where water is heavily subsidized. The political challenges of this policy mix for the Anthropocene are really challenging. As I said, many cities are stuck in phase 2 with these increasing block tariffs with very large lifeline blocks. They don't raise revenues. They don't really help the poor. And most of the subsidies go to middle and upper income households. But they do serve a political purpose. And that political purpose is going to be increasingly hard to maintain in the Anthropocene. I mean, I'm very worried about many of the big cities in the global South that are in water scarce areas with these tariff policies that do nothing really to move cities along toward a resilient water utility that avoids day zeros. I mean, so well, let me stop there. That's about 40 minutes. I'm just about exactly what I said I'm on time. And let me see if anybody has any questions or can have a discussion about some of these results.
Oh, thank you, Dale. Yes, I have I can
hold
see.
on, hold on, Guille, hold on. Thank you. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, and I really appreciate your final reflection. I think that's very valuable because, to your point, many cities are stuck in phase 2, and really the question is how to get stuck out of that. And to your point, like, we are asking consumers to consume less and pay more. So good luck making the political case for that. But and before we have already a question for the public, but before I pass it to you, do you have any experiences that have been able to pass from phase 2 to phase 3, or not really? Are we really trying to discover hot water, to put a notch?
Well, I think different places are struggling with this, and I think we have pieces of the solutions in different cities. I want to emphasize some cities don't need this, right? I mean, it's not everywhere. We're going to see an increasing global landscape of inequality on the water side. There are going to be places that are really facing challenges. And then there are going to be places with plenty of water. I mean, Stockholm's not going to run out of water, right? London's, I mean, there are going to be plenty of places, in the United States that will not run out of water. And so, but I mean, Singapore is a very interesting case. And when I raise Singapore, everybody says, well, no, Singapore is not, we're not like Singapore. And it's true. We're not, I mean, Singapore, but Singapore has done a whole lot on all of these problems. I do think that the experience of Cape Town is very interesting. In Cape Town, just by luck, had a very good group of environmental and resource economists in place in Cape Town that knew the local water system. So, they had world-class environmental economists to help them sort of get through this. That's not to say that there aren't a lot of, they didn't make mistakes, but I think Cape Town is a much more interesting story for, say, you in Mexico City, or Bogota is facing, day zero, issues. I mean, I think people need to really understand that it's possible to have the pipes run dry. In Cape Town, they were just lucky. I mean, the rains came, but it could have been much worse. And I think we're going to increasingly see cities go right up to the brink, and then maybe fall into it. And I think people should be willing to pay for that. I mean, to avoid day zeros, it seems to me a value proposition that people should be willing to pay for. Again, the other lesson that I would emphasize is the need for customer assistance programs. I mean, you have to make sure the poor can afford water. You can't leave them out. So, and I think it's becoming increasingly possible to do that. I mean, Chile obviously has a longstanding plan for subsidizing poor households, but with the IT revolution, the administrative cost of identifying and keeping up to date databases with low income households are getting better and better. I mean, we're able to do that. Singapore does it. Chile does it. I think there are lessons to be learned from those places. Let me stop there.
So mute again. So we have two questions from the public. One is, considering the complexities of PPPs, what are the primary challenges that you consider Mexico faces in these collaborations? And then question number two is, and maybe more on PPPs in general, because we have an audience that goes beyond Mexico today, thankfully. And then the second question is, how do you think this is going to be a curveball, but how do you think recent shifts in U.S. administration policies on environmental and water resource management might influence international collaborations, especially in developing countries? So Trump 2.0.
Those are two tough questions. Well, first off, I don't know the Mexican situation, so I won't weigh in on the Mexican the particulars of the Mexican situation. As I said, John Briscoe used to say that all these problems are local. I mean, but I think there are lessons to be learned. We have a PhD student right now here in Chapel Hill that's working on the privatization experience, comparing public and private providers in Brazil. And I think my story, I mean, in terms of my little systems model that I presented here, is that the regulator needs to have a different set of responsibilities in the Anthropocene. I mean, so I mean, you might call it regulation 2.0, or opposed. I mean, we have to, that it's going to be, you can't expect the private operators to be worried about the disruptions in the global hydrological cycle, shifts in atmospheric rivers, continental drying, losses in storage. This ultimately is going to be the responsibility of the country's water ministry and the regulators. I do think that the utilities need help with making the case for a tariff reform. One of the lessons from the PPPs from the 1990s was that tariff reform had to occur before the privatization effort, right? That happened in a few places, but I think the public education programs that are going to be required in the Anthropocene are much more difficult. So the lesson, that I guess that I would take away from this is that the regulators need to be on television, radio, in schools, at the universities. I mean, this is not the technocratic regulation challenges that we've seen in the past. All those are there, but there needs to be societal leadership in terms of really getting the cities ready for the challenges that they're facing. I don't know about Trump. I don't know the answer on what's going to happen in the U.S. I mean, it could be that you're going to be on your own in solving your water problems, and you can't expect too much from Trump on the foreign aid side. I don't think he's that interested in Mexico City's water problems, Monterrey's.
I agree with you. Does anybody have any other question or comment? Or I have one more question for you, Dale. So going back to the phase 2 and to the increasing block tariffs. So there is a logic behind them, right? I mean, like trying to be generous to the utilities and the regulators of before. There is a logic in them. So what is the what I mean? And I know this is probably another question, but what changed that deserves a change in the logic behind
Yeah.
pricing? So
Yeah.
because yeah.
So there's an emerging literature on increasing block tariffs that I would encourage everyone to look at. As I mentioned, there's two different cultures here on increasing block tariffs. They're used in different ways. I think the correct way to use them is in terms of conveying information about social norms and in the upper block, but the way they're mostly used is in the lower block to provide lifeline rates. And the assumption there is that poor households use less water than rich households, right? And that's the reason one might think that they would be effective. But if you actually look at the correlation between income and water use, in many places, it's very weak. And the household size is much more important in terms of, so, what that means is that, you have many rich households that use very little water, and you have many poor households that use a lot of water. So the targeting that results from an increasing block system is really not very good. I use about, I don't know if you know how much water you use. I use about 11 cubic meters a month, my wife and I. We have a big house. We have all the appliances we need. And if I lived in Delhi, I would have no water bill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, right. So I mean, this sounds good, but it's just uh, it's not a way to deliver subsidies to poor people. It is a way to deliver subsidies to a population, and people often focus on the lifeline block, but they also should focus on the upper blocks, because the upper blocks in many cities in the global south are far below total average cost. So the reality is that the more water you use, the more subsidies you get. And then with that tariff structure, I just don't think you have the resources that you need in the Anthropocene to avoid day zeros. I mean, you can say, well, I just need more subsidies. Well, but good luck with that, right? I mean, if that was the only problem, you would already have, if you could convince people that you needed more subsidies, you'd already have done that. The finance ministry is very reluctant to just keep pouring these kind of subsidies in, especially if you don't control consumption, right? I mean, if you leave water use high, and then you need a lot more subsidies, especially in growing cities with growing populations in the global south, because in that world you need you need more and more capital to expand the system. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does.
I'm interested in if anybody has or knows of sources in Mexico on the cost for different nodes and links in an urban water system. And most of the econometric analysis that we have is at a system level. It's a utility level, and it's just for operation and maintenance. It doesn't include capital cost. I mean, so I'm trying to get capital and CapEx and OMEX for different components of that system in order to see what would happen if I change. I have to intervene in that simple system and change CapEx and OMEX at those nodes and links.
I don't think that data exists. I don't know if somebody from the audience knows and can confirm or not whether the data exists, but I'm pretty positive that data doesn't exist for the Mexico City Water Company, and I doubt it exists for any water company at all in the country.
Well, if you're interested, I mean, I'll just make a pitch. I would love to do some case studies with this simple little model with the best data that is available in particular cities. So, I mean, you're probably right, Francisco. We don't have data from Mexico City, but then the question would be, well, let's make our best guess, right? I mean, maybe my guesses for this global hypothetical city would be way off, and people in Mexico say, well, we don't know exactly, but we know that's too high or that's too low, I mean, and try to see. I think we need to try to understand what can be done to make these large utilities more resilient. And we can't just always keep going, getting more raw water supplies and sending it through a flow-through system.
I think part of the reason why the data doesn't exist isn't even bad faith. It's the way public procurement is conducted.
Yeah.
Because, somewhere utilities have their own Department of Infrastructure and Public Works, but others, and that's increasingly happening, others just like contract a private company to do it, right? So you do the procurement process in block.
Right.
And at that
Right.
point, you can't know, right? You procure through notes and to links, to say something. So really, I mean, we can guess, but and I'm happy to work on that. But it goes to the procurement system is what I'm trying to say. If you want to have like an exact number.
I think that's right. And, but look at it from a water management point of view or utility management point of view. If I don't know what the system-wide costs are for these different kind of interventions, how do I know whether I should do them or not, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how do I evaluate a potable water reuse or a desal plan if I don't have some kind of ability to know how it changes system-wide costs? I mean, I can know what it would cost to build a desal facility, but I don't know what that's going to do to my whole system-wide cost. So it's very hard to make an informed decision. Even something like leakage reduction, I mean, that would seem like the simplest thing, right? I mean, but hard to know what leak it would cost to reduce leaks in Mexico City.
No, they don't know. Like that I don't know. And to your point, like my consumption is 9 cubic meters every 2 months, and I pay $5.
Yeah.
So
well, that's you're getting heavily subsidized. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Heavily subsidized. I don't know what the system-wide costs are in Mexico, but I'm sure that they're much higher than that.
Yeah.
So you don't have the utility just doesn't have the revenues to deal with this. What I see is these forces of the Anthropocene bearing down. I mean, I don't know the situation specifically in Mexico City, but I wouldn't be surprised if you don't face day zeros, the risks of day zeros coming up as well, at least for parts of the system.
We were close this year, but then we were also lucky, like Cape Town, and it started raining. We had very heavy rains during the rainy season, and the system recovered. But it's a dry season again. Yesterday this weekend we were at 95 Fahrenheit or something like that. So next year is not gonna go. Next year may not look good either. But it's tough, and it also the fact that utilities are local level facilities. Right. It also creates all sorts of social contracts. So, for instance, in Mexico, the social contract obviously all the time was that as long as utilities cover their OPEX, the federal government would cover the CAPEX.
Right.
And that was how the system operated. Now that the costs are growing, utilities are not even covering the OPEX. So there is really a break in the contract or in the social contract of how the utilities are operating across the country.
Yeah. Well, I think that, again, I don't know what water use looks like in Mexico City these days, but globally, the problem is that many places, where prices are very low, the utility just can't get in control of consumption. I mean, you know, and so, you know, you're entering a world where you risk day zeros, where people are consuming, you know, 200, 250, 300 liters per capita per day. You know, they don't, you know, so that you have to get, somehow you have to get control of that customer demand. It may not be prices that you know, but I think prices play some kind of role there. I mean, you have to have some kind of signaling on what's a reasonable amount of water for people to use in a water scarce area. If you give it away free, I mean, I worked in the former Soviet Union, and there was zero price for water, and people didn't fix their toilets or their leaking faucets, right? So if you don't have any incentive to fix a leaking toilet or a faucet, you need huge quantities of water, right? And so you have to at least incentivize people to do that. And, you know, I think you can do that with education and nudges, but you probably also have to do it with prices. The prices have to be at least enough to get people to fix a leaking toilet.
Well, fix your toilets. So, so
Well,
there are no comments.
you can find me on the web. If anybody's got any further thoughts or comments or reflections, like I said, this is work in progress, and I appreciate anybody has any help or insights to make this a stronger presentation. Any questions I didn't answer that you'd like to have answered, let me know.
Yeah.
Guille, would you like to close?
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Francisco, for your time and excellent, great presentation. We will, if you agree, we would like to put this presentation on YouTube in our CFA Society Mexico channel of YouTube. Thank you very much.
That's fine. Okay.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Okay.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great
Hey,
day.
take care. They'll catch up later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.